Welcome to the wild, chaotic, and often absurd world of ancient Rome. In this documentary, we'll unravel everything from a pair of twins suckled by a she-wolf, seriously, to emperors who thought they were gods, and the dramatic fall of an empire that lasted over 1,000 years. Before we dive into sibling rivalry, kidnappings, betrayals, and toga politics, don't forget to hit subscribe and leave a comment telling us where and when you're watching this. Midnight in Rome? Lunch break in Berlin? Let us know. Your fellow Roman nerds want to hear it. Now tighten your sandals, warm up your best Latin phrases, or pretend to, and join us as we trace the legendary origins of Rome. Spoiler alert, it involves murder, divine wolves, and a very dramatic founding story. Before Rome was built, before emperors and legions, there were two babies in a basket. Romulus and Remus, twin sons of the war god Mars and a human princess, were sentenced to death as newborns. Family drama, Roman style. Instead of dying, they floated gently down the Tiber River, because apparently rivers and myths are very baby-friendly. A she-wolf, yes, an actual wolf, discovered them and did what any rational wild animal would do. Adopted them and breastfed them, as one does. Later, a kind shepherd and his wife raised them into strong, slightly feral young men. That's how our legendary founders started out. Not in golden cradles, but in the wild, drinking wolf milk and growing up with sheep. And just like that, the destiny of Rome began. Not with a Senate meeting, but with a wolf mom and two muddy boys with godly abs. You'd think two brothers raised by a wolf would be inseparable, right? Wrong. As Romulus and Remus grew into strong, ambitious young men, they had one tiny disagreement. Who got to found the great city of Rome, and more importantly, name it? Like any mature adults, they handled it by arguing over birds. Seriously. They each climbed a hill, watched the sky, and waited to see which birds appeared first. Spoiler, Romulus won. Remus naturally called foul play. Tension soared. Eventually, Remus mocked Romulus by jumping over the low wall he'd just built. Romulus, not in the mood for sibling comedy, stabbed him on the spot. "So perish anyone who crosses my walls," he allegedly declared. And that, friends, is how the founding of Rome began. Not with blueprints or ribbon cuttings, but with a fratricide and a blood-soaked brick. If you thought wolf milk was intense, just wait till politics kicks in. After the very unfortunate and extremely fratricidal incident with Remus, Romulus got to work. No more sibling drama, just city-building vibes. He picked the Palatine Hill as the prime real estate for his grand vision. Why? Great views, solid elevation, and plenty of space for future invasions. With a few followers, aka guys who didn't mind being ruled by a wolf-raised dude with a sword, Romulus laid the foundations. Literally, he started drawing city lines in the dirt with a plow because nothing says future empire like aggressive gardening. And so, on April 21st, 753 BCE, yes, we know the exact date because Romans loved anniversaries, the city of Rome was officially born. Named after its first king, founder, and accidental brother slayer, Romulus. The party was small, the crime rate was already high, but the legend had begun. Rome wasn't built in a day, but it definitely started with a dramatic one. There was just one problem with Romulus's shiny new city: no women. Apparently, Rome was built by men, for men, with zero long-term planning. So what did Romulus do? He threw a party. Seriously, he invited the neighboring Sabines and other tribes for a grand festival with food, games, and surprise mass abduction. At a prearranged signal, the Roman men grabbed the Sabine women and carried them off. Understandably, the Sabine men were not thrilled. What followed was a war, some heavy awkwardness, and eventually, a peace treaty. The Sabine women, now married, or Stockholm syndromed, to Roman men, stepped between the two armies and begged them to stop fighting. The result? A merger. Rome got its women, the Sabines got partial ownership. And somehow this diplomatic disaster became the foundation of multicultural Rome. Moral of the story: never underestimate the power of a party invitation with a hidden agenda. After the whole wolf milk, fratricide, and wife-snatching saga, Rome was finally a real city. But you can't run a city forever with just a guy and his sword. So Romulus, who eventually vanished in a thunderstorm, as legends do, was followed by a series of kings. First came Numa Pompilius, a peaceful, bearded philosopher type who loved rules, rituals, and absolutely hated war. He invented a religious calendar, made temples trendy, and basically turned Rome from barbarian bachelor pad into something resembling a civilized society. Then came Tullus Hostilius, who said, "That's cute," and went full war mode again. He demolished Alba Longa and flexed so hard the gods probably winced. These early kings set the tone. A little peace, a little war, and a lot of drama. So while Rome grew in size and ambition, its throne turned into a mix of priesthood, politics, and occasional divine lightning. So where did early Rome get its sense of fashion, fancy rituals, and love of arches? From the Etruscans, the cool neighbors up north. While the Romans were still figuring out which end of the plow to hold, the Etruscans were busy building stone cities, inventing aqueducts, and wearing togas like runway models. They had priests who read the future from animal livers. Yes, livers. Elaborate funeral games that inspired gladiator fights, and a flair for gold accessories. When Rome wasn't conquering Etruria, it was borrowing heavily. Rome copied Etruscan architecture, adopted their gods, mimicked their government structure, and even hired their plumbers. It was like Rome peeked over the Etruscan fence and said, "We'll take one of everything." So before Rome became Rome, it was basically a stylish Etruscan remix, with better branding and more military ambition. Enter Tarquinius Superbus. His name means Tarquin the Proud, and oh boy, he lived up to it. He wasn't elected, invited, or even politely suggested. He straight up seized the throne after orchestrating a royal accident. Once in power, Tarquin ruled with all the subtlety of a sledgehammer. He ignored the Senate, executed critics, and turned Rome into a dictatorship with extra drama. Yes, he built big things like the Temple of Jupiter and expanded Roman territory, but also treated everyone like peasants in his personal soap opera. The nobles hated him, the people feared him, and his son, well, let's just say that apple didn't fall far from the ominous family tree. Tarquin's reign was the last straw, a cautionary tale wrapped in gold trim. And Rome, it was done with kings. The era of monarchy was about to meet a very messy, very final end. If you're looking for the moment Rome said, "Enough is enough," this is it. Lucretia was the ideal Roman woman, respected, loyal, and unfortunately caught in the political mess of Tarquin's dysfunctional royal family. One day, the king's charming but creepy son, Sextus Tarquinius, decided he wanted what he couldn't have. He broke into Lucretia's home and assaulted her. In a heartbreaking act of defiance, Lucretia told her family what happened, demanded justice, and then ended her life to preserve her honor. The news hit Rome like a thunderclap. This wasn't just a crime. It was the final insult of a tyrannical regime. Led by her outraged husband and the nobleman Lucius Junius Brutus, the Romans exploded into revolt. No more kings, no more Tarquins. With one tragic act, Lucretia unintentionally ignited a revolution that would change Roman history forever. After the tragic death of Lucretia, the Roman aristocracy finally had their rallying cry. No more kings, they shouted, not because they hated monarchy, but because they hated this monarchy. Led by Lucius Junius Brutus, yes, the same guy who swore on Lucretia's body, they formed a resistance group of senators, nobles, and very loud citizens. They stormed into the forum, gave a rousing speech about liberty and tyranny, and then collectively pointed at the royal palace like, "You're out." The Tarquins were exiled, and just like that, Rome became a republic. Because nothing says democracy like a bunch of angry noblemen with togas and egos. The people cheered, the senators high-fived, mentally, and Brutus was declared one of the first consuls of Rome. From now on, power would be shared, not inherited. Well, theoretically. This scene marks the end of kings and the start of centuries of glorious bickering in togas. With the monarchy gone, the Romans now had a new problem. Who's in charge? Their answer, everyone and no one. Enter the Republic, a beautifully chaotic system featuring two consuls who shared power, argued daily, and changed every year. Like speed dating but for political instability. These consuls were like co-CEOs, except they could veto each other's decisions, which made meetings fun and infuriating. Supporting them was the Senate, a group of experienced, wrinkled aristocrats who basically ran the show from behind fancy columns. Then came the assemblies, where regular citizens shouted their opinions into the political void. Some were heard, most were ignored. It was democracy, but with marble and more sandals. Despite the messiness, it worked, mostly. Rome had traded tyrants for togas, crowns for consensus. It wasn't perfect, but it laid the bureaucratic groundwork for an empire to come. And the best part? If a decision went wrong, no one really knew who to blame. Genius. Just when Rome thought it had everything sorted with its shiny new republic, the plebeians, the everyday folks who did all the hard work, realized something awkward. They had zero say in anything. No vote, no rights, no respect, just taxes and military drafts. Naturally, they weren't thrilled. So in true Roman style, they went on strike. But not just any strike. They literally walked out of the city and camped on a nearby hill, like ancient protest campers. The senators panicked. Who would farm the land? Who would fight the wars? Who would fill the amphorae with wine? The crisis sparked negotiations, and Rome introduced the tribune of the plebs, an official whose job was to protect the common people's rights. The tribunes could veto laws and even arrest officials, basically superheroes in togas. It was the first big step toward balancing power between the rich and the slightly less rich. The Republic had survived its first internal shakeup, but it was just the beginning of a long and loud struggle between classes that would define Roman politics for centuries. In early Republican Rome, society was neatly and unfairly divided into two main classes, the patricians and the plebeians. Think of it as VIPs versus everyone else. The patricians were the elite, wealthy noble families who could trace their ancestry back to Rome's mythical founders. They controlled politics, religion, and most importantly, land. The plebeians, on the other hand, were the workers, farmers, artisans, and soldiers. The muscle behind Rome's rise, but with barely any power or voice. Plebeians could bleed for the Republic, but not vote on how it was run. Naturally, tensions brewed faster than a Roman wine barrel in summer. While patricians strutted around in spotless togas and gave speeches in the Senate, plebeians were busy trying to feed their families and wondering when they'd finally get a say in things. Spoiler, they're not going to stay quiet for long. Welcome to the great Roman class struggle. Round one begins now. Fed up with being second-class citizens in their own republic, the plebeians decided it was time for some bold action. So in what could only be described as ancient Rome's first labor strike, they packed up their belongings and marched out of the city. Their destination? The Aventine Hill. There they pitched tents, lit campfires, and essentially said, "Good luck running Rome without us." The patricians, of course, panicked. Imagine losing your farmers, blacksmiths, and soldiers all at once. Suddenly, the Senate wasn't so smug anymore. The Aventine sit-out wasn't just a tantrum. It was a strategic move. Without the plebeians, Rome couldn't function. And the message was clear: give us rights or enjoy your lonely empire. The standoff marked the beginning of real political negotiations and proved that unity among the common folk could shake the foundations of the mighty republic. After the dramatic campout on the Aventine Hill, the patricians finally realized, maybe we do need the plebeians to keep Rome running. In a rare moment of political wisdom, or panic, they created a new office, the Tribunus Plebis, or Tribune of the Plebs. These officials weren't just symbolic, they had real power, like vetoing laws and protecting plebeians from unfair treatment. Think of them as ancient Rome's version of a whistleblower with legal immunity and a loud megaphone. The tribunes were sacrosanct, meaning if you laid a finger on one, it was game over. Suddenly, plebeians had champions in the political arena. Of course, this didn't mean equality overnight, but it was a major step. The Republic had taken its first awkward but sincere step toward representation. And as Rome's favorite new political figures, the tribunes quickly became both loved by the masses and deeply feared by the patrician elite. Now that Rome had tribunals for the common folk, the plebeians asked the next logical question: cool, but can we at least know the rules? Enter the 12 tables. Before this, laws were more like rumors passed around the Senate bathhouse. So the plebeians pushed for something written and public. The result? Rome's very first set of written laws, chiseled into 12 bronze tablets and displayed in the Forum for all to see. These laws were a quirky mix: rules about debt, funerals, property lines, and even how many mourners you could hire. But most importantly, they were equal for all citizens, in theory. Sure, some laws were wildly outdated, and others felt like a legal advice column from a grumpy uncle, but it was a step toward transparency and justice. And for the plebeians, a huge win. No more secret laws used to keep them in the dark. For the first time, knowledge was public, and that scared the patricians more than an army of Gauls. Just when Rome started to feel like it had its internal drama somewhat under control, the neighbors came knocking with swords. The Latin League, once a buddy-buddy alliance, suddenly wasn't so friendly anymore. Rome, ever ambitious, wanted more influence over Latin towns. The Latins? Not thrilled. Cue the Latin War. It was the classical version of a group chat argument turning into a street brawl. Battles flared across the countryside, but Rome, powered by its obsessive organization and increasingly professional legions, came out on top. This war wasn't just about winning, it was a flex. Rome showed the rest of Italy that it wasn't some scrappy city-state anymore. It was becoming the big boss. The war's end brought treaties, some more friendly than others, and Latin cities were pulled closer into Rome's orbit. It was the beginning of a strategy Rome would perfect later: fight, win, befriend your enemies, and slowly absorb their lunch. After Rome flexed its muscles in the Latin War, the so-called Latin League realized they were in way over their togas. The alliance crumbled like a poorly baked Roman loaf. One by one, Latin cities either surrendered, negotiated treaties, heavily tilted toward Rome, or were simply absorbed into the growing Roman blob. But Rome wasn't just conquering, they were networking. By cleverly offering partial citizenship and military protection, Rome turned defeated enemies into loyal allies. Well, mostly loyal. This marked a turning point. Rome was no longer just a player on the Italian stage. It was directing the entire play. From trade routes to tax collection, Rome started to act like the regional boss, and everyone else, supporting cast. The fall of the Latin League didn't just change maps, it changed the way Rome would expand from then on, through a careful combo of sword, senate, and strategic generosity. Just when Rome thought it had the Italian peninsula under control, the Samnites stepped in like that one unpredictable cousin at family dinner. The Samnites, mountain warriors with fierce independence and sandals caked in grit, became a thorn in Rome's leather-bound side. Over nearly 50 years, Rome fought 3 long and grueling Samnite wars. These weren't your average weekend skirmishes. These were the kind of wars that turned consuls gray and made historians sigh. The terrain was brutal, the tactics unorthodox, and the pride oversized on both sides. Rome learned the hard way that conquering hills is harder than conquering hearts, but each defeat made the Republic tougher, smarter, and more determined to pave the entire peninsula in roads and Roman law. The Samnite Wars forged the army into the disciplined machine it would become, setting the stage for the real expansion beyond Italy. But first, Rome had to survive the next humiliating lesson. The Battle of the Caudine Forks wasn't really a battle, more like a masterclass in humiliation. The Romans, full of confidence and maybe a bit too much wine the night before, marched boldly into a narrow mountain pass. Unfortunately, the Samnites had already prepared a little surprise. The exit was blocked, the entrance was sealed, and Rome's finest were suddenly very stuck. With no way out and no battle to fight, they were forced to surrender. But the real sting? They had to march under a yoke of spears, a symbolic act of ultimate disgrace. Imagine an army of proud warriors walking with heads down, like school kids caught cheating on a test. Rome never forgot that shame. And while no blood was spilled that day, the wound to Roman pride cut deep. What followed wasn't just revenge. It was a campaign to ensure no one ever laughed at a Roman soldier again. Spoiler: the next time Rome met the Samnites, they didn't bring jokes. They brought strategy. After a few painful lessons, see Marching Under Spears, Rome realized brute force wasn't always the best strategy. Enter the Roman alliance system, a genius mix of carrot and stick. Instead of destroying every conquered city, Rome offered a deal. Want to keep your local leaders and not be burnt to the ground? Swear loyalty, send troops when we ask, and maybe we'll give you partial citizenship, eventually. It was like a Roman loyalty card, but with swords. The clever part? These allies couldn't form alliances with each other, only with Rome. Divide and rule, with a dash of diplomacy. Over time, these allies became so Romanized, they forgot they weren't actually Romans. And when trouble came knocking, say Hannibal with his elephants, Rome could call on a massive network of semi-loyal, kinda Roman cities. It wasn't friendship, it was strategic codependency. And boy, did it work. With the Latin alliance out of the way and the Samnites mostly handled, Rome turned its gaze toward two more friendly neighbors, the Etruscans in the north and the Volscians in the southeast. Spoiler: they didn't stay friendly for long. The Etruscans, once the cultural big brothers of early Rome, now found themselves getting a taste of Roman ambition. Meanwhile, the Volscians, who had a long tradition of fighting Rome on weekends, realized this wasn't just another scuffle. It was the beginning of the end. These wars weren't as flashy as elephants or surprise spears under mountains, but they were crucial. Rome was no longer just putting out fires. It was drawing borders, locking them down, and flexing its muscles. With every campaign, the Republic grew more confident, more efficient, and more annoyingly unbeatable. By the time the dust settled, northern and southeastern Italy were firmly in Roman hands. Expansion? Checked. Enemies humbled? Checked. One step closer to full Italian domination? Absolutely. Just when Rome thought it had everything under control, a dramatic twist entered stage left. Riding an elephant. Enter Pyrrhus of Epirus, the cousin of Alexander the Great and self-declared protector of Greek cities in southern Italy. Charismatic, ambitious, and slightly obsessed with grandeur, Pyrrhus landed with a professional army, flashy armor, and war elephants that made Roman soldiers question their life choices. At first it worked. Pyrrhus won battles like Heraclea and Asculum, but every victory cost him dearly. Rome, being Rome, kept replenishing its army like a hydra sprouting heads. The Romans didn't care how many times they got trampled. They just kept coming back. Pyrrhus, meanwhile, was racking up victories that felt more like defeats. Eventually he sighed, looked at his dwindling forces, and decided maybe conquering Sicily sounded more fun. His retreat was as dramatic as his entrance, leaving Rome battered but unbeaten, and a little wiser about elephants. With Pyrrhus sailing off to chase dreams elsewhere, Rome finally had a moment to breathe, and then immediately marched into Tarentum. This once proud Greek city, still smelling faintly of olive oil and defiance, became the final puzzle piece in Rome's unification of the Italian peninsula. No more rival leagues, no more war elephants. Just Rome, standing tall, scarred but stronger. By this point, they had perfected the art of turning enemies into allies, or paving stones. Rome didn't just conquer, they integrated, handing out partial citizenship like slightly stingy party favors. The Italian peninsula, once a chaotic mash of hill tribes, Greek colonies, and bickering city-states, was now under one red-crested banner. The Republic had risen, not just as a city, but as a regional superpower. And somewhere, a senator probably muttered, "This is just the beginning." Spoiler alert, he was right. If Rome was a rising, muscle-flexing republic, then Carthage was the cool, rich kid with a merchant fleet and a tan. Located in North Africa, modern-day Tunisia, Carthage wasn't about marching legions but minting money, thanks to its massive trade empire stretching across the Mediterranean. Founded by Phoenicians centuries earlier, Carthage was all about ships, silver, and sass. They had a navy that could wrap around the coast, and their merchants could sell you anything from Spanish silver to elephant-shaped souvenirs. But behind that wealth lay a calculating mind. Carthage was no pushover. It had skilled generals, loyal allies, and more money than a Roman senator could dream of. As Rome gobbled up Italy, the Carthaginians watched with wary eyes. Two powers, one sea, one inevitable clash. This was not a rivalry. It was the start of a three-season war drama featuring elephants, betrayals, and a whole lot of salt. It all started with a small island that couldn't mind its own business. Sicily. Strategically placed in the middle of the Mediterranean, Sicily was like the Wi-Fi router of ancient trade. It connected everyone, and everyone wanted control. At the time, a power struggle erupted in the Sicilian city of Messana between local forces and foreign mercenaries. Rome and Carthage both saw an opportunity and said, "Let's help, but not together." Carthage sent ships. Rome sent legions. Then both side-eyed each other like two guests showing up at a party with the same gift. Awkward. Tensions flared, alliances shifted faster than a toga in a Roman bath, and boom, war was declared. This was the First Punic War, a fight over a rock that turned into a brawl between titans. Carthage had the navy. Rome had the nerve. Neither side knew the war would drag on for over 2 decades, but it all began with one island, one city, and one colossal case of mutual distrust. Rome had a small problem. They were great at land battles, but the sea? That was Carthage's playground. When the First Punic War broke out, Rome had to figure out this whole navy thing fast. So what did they do? They found a wrecked Carthaginian ship, studied it like a student before finals, and said, "Let's build 100 of these." But Rome being Rome, they added a twist, a boarding bridge called the corvus. Think of it as a plank with teeth. When Roman ships got close, the corvus would slam down onto the enemy ship, turning a sea battle into a good old-fashioned land brawl. Carthaginians were stunned. They expected naval duels, not sudden wrestling matches at sea. Rome's soldiers, used to stabbing things on solid ground, suddenly found themselves charging across wobbly planks yelling, "Surprise boarding party!" It was messy, it was risky, but it worked. The Romans weren't just learning to swim, they were inventing naval chaos. And somehow, between trial and error, and many sunk ships, they started winning. Rome's first steps into naval warfare were clumsy, sure, but never underestimate a stubborn republic with a grudge and a blueprint. After years of sea blunders, shipwrecks, and shouting across decks, Rome did the impossible. They won. The First Punic War finally ended, and the prize? Sicily. It might not sound flashy now, but back then, this island was the crown jewel of the Mediterranean. Rome strutted in like a rookie who just won their first tournament. Carthage, on the other hand, sulked back to North Africa, licking its wounds and probably grumbling about Corvus bridges. This victory wasn't just about land. It was Rome's first real step beyond Italy. And boy, did it feel good. Sicily became Rome's first overseas province, and suddenly the Senate had to figure out new stuff like, how do you tax an island? And who's in charge over there? They basically winged it. But for all their chaotic admin skills, Rome had made one thing clear. They weren't just local bullies anymore. The Republic was thinking big. And Sicily, well, it was just the beginning of a very long imperial shopping list. Before Hannibal was the nightmare of Rome, he was just a Carthaginian kid with a serious grudge. His dad, Hamilcar Barca, was a general who fought Rome during the First Punic War and didn't take the loss well. Legend says that before heading to Spain, he took little Hannibal to an altar, made him swear eternal hatred against Rome. You know, typical father-son bonding. As Hannibal grew up, he wasn't the kind to forget a promise. Brilliant, charismatic, and slightly terrifying, he studied warfare like others studied poetry. By the time he led Carthaginian troops in Spain, everyone knew this wasn't just any commander. This was the guy who was going to give Rome sleepless nights. And oh, he would, with elephants, lots of them. But before we get to Alps and icy feet, let's savor this quiet before the storm. The rise of a man who would make the entire Roman Republic shake in its sandals. Most generals would think twice before marching an army of elephants over snowy mountains. But Hannibal wasn't most generals. In one of history's boldest military gambits, he led tens of thousands of soldiers and about 37 war elephants across the frigid, treacherous Alps to invade Italy from the north, catching the Romans completely off guard. The journey was brutal: narrow cliffs, freezing winds, hostile tribes, and grumpy elephants slipping on ice. Many men, and a few poor elephants, didn't make it. But Hannibal, part warlord, part madman, pushed through. When he finally descended into Italy, his army, though battered, was still deadly, and the psychological shock alone was worth the frostbite. Rome had never imagined an enemy could literally fall from the sky. This moment cemented Hannibal's legend. He didn't just declare war, he made an entrance. After braving the Alps like a frost-bitten mountain goat, Hannibal descended into Italy with fire in his eyes and immediately started handing out Roman defeats like party favors. First came the Battle of Lake Trasimene, where Hannibal pulled off a masterclass in ambush tactics. Roman troops marching by the lake in thick fog suddenly found themselves flanked, surrounded, and completely bamboozled. Many were cut down before they even drew their swords. Then came Cannae, Hannibal's greatest hit. Outnumbered nearly 2-1, he lured the Romans into a trap so elegant, future generals would study it for millennia. His troops bent like a bow under Roman pressure, and then snapped shut, encircling the Roman legions completely. Over 50,000 Romans died that day. It wasn't just a loss, it was a historical smackdown. Rome was shaken, but not shattered. Hannibal had proven himself a genius, but the game was far from over. After the disasters at Trasimene and Cannae, Rome was in no mood for another round of Hannibal's magic tricks. Enter Fabius Maximus, the most cautious man in Italy, possibly in world history. His strategy? Don't fight, just annoy. Fabius avoided pitched battles, shadowed Hannibal's army like an overbearing hall monitor, and cut off his supply lines. The Romans called it the Fabian strategy. Critics called him a coward, but Fabius had a point. Hannibal couldn't conquer if he was stuck chasing ghosts. Hannibal, meanwhile, grew increasingly frustrated. His soldiers wanted action. Rome wanted revenge. But Fabius played the long game, like a chess grandmaster at a checkers tournament. Though mocked at first, his patience wore Hannibal down, slowly but surely. Rome was learning that sometimes the best way to win is to not play, at least not on the other guy's terms. Rome finally had enough of playing defense. Enter Scipio Africanus, young, confident, and probably the only Roman who didn't flinch at Hannibal's name. While the Senate bickered, Scipio had a bold idea: stop chasing Hannibal around Italy and take the war to his doorstep, North Africa. It was like punching the bully's house instead of his face. Scipio trained a new army, full of young Romans who hadn't been traumatized at Cannae. With charm, speeches, and probably a few threats, he convinced the Senate to let him sail. When he landed in Africa, Carthage panicked. They called Hannibal home, cutting short his vacation in Italy. Scipio's gamble worked. Suddenly, the hunter became the hunted, and Hannibal was forced to defend his homeland. It was a role reversal no one expected, except maybe Scipio, who had been planning it all along with a smirk. The final showdown was set: Scipio Africanus versus Hannibal Barca at the plains of Zama. Two legends, one battlefield. Hannibal, older and more cautious now, brought war elephants and seasoned troops. Scipio, young and audacious, had studied his opponent like a nerd preparing for final exams. When Hannibal's elephants charged, the Romans pulled a trick straight from the playbook of how to not get trampled. Open the lines and let the elephants run right through. Chaos ensued, mostly for Carthage. Scipio's cavalry hit from behind, and Hannibal's men found themselves surrounded. After years of haunting Rome like a bad dream, Hannibal was finally defeated. Zama wasn't just a battle, it was a full-circle moment. The war ended, Carthage lost, and Scipio, he got a new nickname, Africanus, which sounds cooler than that guy who finally beat Hannibal. After the crushing defeat at Zama, Carthage wasn't just licking its wounds. It was basically grounded for life. Rome, acting like the strictest parent in history, imposed terms so harsh they might as well have said, "You can have a city, but no fun allowed." Carthage was forbidden from having an army, building warships, or engaging in any foreign wars. Even sneezing aggressively might have counted as a violation. Every move they made had to be approved by Rome, including things like, "Can we defend ourselves if pirates show up?" Spoiler, no. Carthage, once the queen of Mediterranean trade, was reduced to a glorified shopping mall with great ruins. Hannibal, frustrated and humiliated, eventually went into exile, while Rome sat back and kept an eye out like a nosy neighbor with binoculars. Peace had returned, for now. But beneath the silence, resentment simmered. And Rome, well, it never forgot a grudge. Rome had a saying, "Carthago delenda est." Carthage must be destroyed. And oh boy, did they mean it. After years of quiet tension, Rome found the flimsiest excuse imaginable. Something like Carthage built a fence too tall and declared war. The Third Punic War was less of a war and more of a final beatdown. Carthage, stripped of its army and navy, still fought bravely for 3 years with makeshift weapons and sheer stubbornness. But in 146 BCE, Rome broke through. The city was burned to the ground, its walls torn down, and its population either killed or enslaved. Some Romans claimed they sowed salt into the earth so nothing could grow again. Probably an exaggeration, but hey, it sounds epic. Carthage, once a jewel of trade and strategy, was now ash and rubble. Rome had proven a point. Never make them angry twice. With Carthage gone, the Mediterranean became a Roman lake. And the Republic? Well, it was just getting started with its empire dreams. Victory tastes sweet, especially when it's backed by war loot. After the Punic Wars and conquests in Greece and Asia Minor, Rome became filthy rich. But instead of sharing the wealth, it all flowed into the pockets of the aristocracy. Senators flaunted gold-trimmed togas, built marble villas, and held banquets where peacocks were stuffed with even more peacocks. Meanwhile, ordinary Roman citizens, especially small farmers who fought in the wars, returned home to find their lands bought out or neglected. Huge estates called latifundia, owned by nobles and worked by slaves, swallowed up the countryside. The rich got richer, the poor got desperate, and Rome became a pressure cooker of inequality. This wasn't the Golden Age, it was the Gilded Age. All that glitters was in the hands of the elite. As aristocrats gobbled up more land to build massive slave-run estates, small farmers were pushed out, literally. Returning veterans found their plots either swallowed by debt or absorbed by their rich neighbors. Unable to compete with slave labor, they packed their bags and shuffled into Rome, jobless and landless. Thus was born a new social class, the proletari, citizens who had nothing but their children and the right to vote, which ironically made them quite valuable to power-hungry politicians. These landless Romans flooded the city, forming long lines for free grain and cheap entertainment at the Colosseum. If there had been a LinkedIn for ancient Rome, their profiles would have just read, "Available for riots and voting. Will work for bread." This growing urban underclass became a powerful political tool and a ticking time bomb. Enter the Gracchus brothers, Tiberius and Gaius, two well-educated aristocrats with a conscience, clearly an endangered species in Roman politics. Shocked by the growing gap between the rich and the poor, Tiberius decided to stir the pot by proposing land reforms. His idea? Take the public land hogged by the elite and give it back to the poor. Revolutionary stuff. The Senate, made up mostly of land-hogging elites, responded with the political equivalent of flipping a table. Despite resistance, Tiberius pressed forward, winning support from the plebeians and instantly earning a spot on the Senate's least favorite people list. His younger brother Gaius, equally sharp-tongued and idealistic, joined the cause later. Together, the Gracchi became icons of reform and targets for backlash. But for a brief moment, Rome's poor had champions in high places, and the establishment was rattled. Tiberius Gracchus's reforms hit a nerve. And by nerve, we mean the collective wallet of the Roman elite. Determined to silence this troublemaker with ideals, the Senate orchestrated a not-so-subtle removal. During a tense political assembly, chaos broke out. Tiberius, unarmed and surrounded, was clubbed to death by senators wielding literal chair legs and broken stools. So much for civilized debate. His body was unceremoniously dumped into the Tiber River, as if to say, that's what you get for caring. His death was Rome's political system sending a loud, violent message. Reformers, beware. But martyrdom has a strange power. Tiberius's brutal end only galvanized public support and laid the groundwork for his brother Gaius's future movement. After the brutal death of his brother, Gaius Gracchus stepped onto the political stage like a man with a mission and a really long to-do list. Determined to carry the torch, Gaius went further than Tiberius, proposing reforms not only on land redistribution, but also on grain subsidies, public infrastructure, and even extending citizenship to Italian allies. Naturally, the Senate was thrilled. Just kidding, they were furious. Gaius spoke passionately, often shaking scrolls in the air like he was about to cast a spell. The people adored him, the aristocrats, not so much. As tensions rose, the Senate branded him a threat. But Gaius wasn't backing down. If his brother's blood hadn't been enough, maybe a full-on policy overhaul would do the trick. The political winds in Rome were blowing sharp and straight toward tragedy. Gaius Gracchus, despite his passionate speeches and reformist fire, had made one too many enemies in the Senate. With tensions boiling over, a riot broke out. Gaius, refusing to surrender, fled with a loyal servant. The chase ended on the Aventine Hill, where Gaius ordered his servant to kill him rather than fall into enemy hands. It was a dramatic, Shakespeare-worthy moment, except, 70 years too early. His death marked not just the end of the Gracchi brothers' reform dream, but also a turning point. Politics in Rome would never be polite again. From now on, debate was less about words and more about swords. With the Senate distracted and the people restless, along came Gaius Marius, Rome's unlikely new hero. A self-made man from the countryside, he wasn't born into nobility, but boy did he know how to win over the masses. His big idea? Reform the army. Instead of recruiting only landowners, Marius opened the ranks to the landless poor. In exchange, the state would provide weapons, training, and, most importantly, loot. Suddenly, being a soldier wasn't just patriotic, it was profitable. Veterans now dreamed of farms and bonuses, and Marius became the man who could deliver it all. His reforms turned Rome's military into a full-time profession and made him wildly popular. Of course, when your army depends on you for retirement, well, let's just say the loyalty starts shifting from Senate and people of Rome to that guy who pays us. Marius's army reform worked a little too well. Soldiers were no longer loyal to the Roman Republic. They were loyal to Marius, the man who gave them food, land, and glory. It was like Rome had accidentally created a fan club with swords. Whenever Marius showed up, veterans would cheer louder than at a gladiator match. Worse still, future generals quickly realized this trick. If soldiers fought for the person who promised them the most, politics became less about laws and more about which general had the biggest fan base in armor. The Senate's speeches grew longer and less effective, while generals with private armies grew bolder. Rome was slowly turning from a republic into a general-led reality show, with military might as the vote. Spoiler alert, this won't end well. Enter Lucius Cornelius Sulla, aristocrat, conservative, and very much not a fan of Marius's populist vibes. While Marius won the hearts of the poor, Sulla had something better: angry rich friends and a solid military resume. When the Senate tried giving Marius another command, Sulla was like, nope, and marched his army straight toward Rome, something no one had dared to do before. It was the Roman equivalent of rage-quitting the political game and then returning with a flamethrower. Sulla's entrance wasn't just dramatic, it rewrote the rulebook. Suddenly, military power trumped debate. From now on, if you didn't like what the Senate said, you could just walk in with an army and shout louder. Spoiler, this sets a terrible precedent. What happens when two powerful generals with giant egos and personal armies get into a political spat? That's right, Civil War. Roman edition, Marius and Sulla, once allies, now became bitter rivals. As each marched their loyal troops across the Italian countryside, Italy turned into a giant chessboard, except all the pawns had swords and really bad tempers. Farmers fled, towns got trampled, and Senate meetings suddenly looked more like war briefings. This wasn't just a battle over power. It was a live demonstration of how Rome had evolved from debate and democracy to who's got the bigger army. In a twisted way, it was the ultimate job interview for dictatorship. Winner takes Rome. After winning the Civil War, Sulla didn't just walk into Rome. He stomped in like a man with a personal grudge and a to-do list. Step 1, declare himself dictator without an expiration date. Step 2, create a literal hit list of enemies, post it publicly so everyone knew exactly who to avoid or betray. This list, called the proscription, turned Rome into a paranoid game of survival. Neighbors ratted on neighbors, sons betrayed fathers, and every bearded senator suddenly found a reason to grow a mustache and flee. Sulla strutted through the Senate like a peacock in armor, rewriting laws, silencing critics, and proving once and for all, the quickest way to absolute power is with a sword in one hand and a blacklist in the other. In a twist no one saw coming, Sulla voluntarily stepped down from his position as dictator. Yes, you read that right. After reshaping Roman politics with fear, prescription lists, and iron-fisted reforms, he casually said, "I'm done," and retired like a warlord on vacation. He spent his last years writing his memoirs, attending parties, and giving unsolicited political advice. While Sulla faded into semi-domestic obscurity, Rome didn't forget. His reforms had carved a new path, one where generals no longer served the Republic but wielded it like a personal army. Sulla may have exited stage left, but he left the curtain wide open for the next ambitious strongman. Spoiler alert, it only gets messier from here. Welcome to the political power trio of ancient Rome, Caesar, Pompey, and Crassus, also known as the First Triumvirate. Think of it as a very tense group project where everyone wants to be the leader. Crassus brought the cash, Pompey the military prestige, and Caesar? He brought ambition, charm, and a master plan. Together, they bypassed the traditional Republican system like it was a speed bump, making decisions that left the Senate fuming. They weren't officially recognized, but who needs permission when you've got money, armies, and fan clubs? This alliance, while shaky from the start, allowed Caesar to rise like a political rock star. But as with all Roman bromances, cracks would soon appear, especially when one guy gets too famous, another gets jealous, and the third wants to conquer the East. Spoiler, it won't end in a group hug. While Rome was still caught up in political power games, Julius Caesar was busy building an empire. His campaign in Gaul wasn't just a military excursion, it was a masterclass in strategy, propaganda, and self-promotion. For nearly a decade, Caesar marched through the thick forests and fierce tribes of what is now France and Belgium, turning battle after battle into a headline-worthy triumph. He didn't just conquer, he documented every skirmish with flair, making himself the star of a grand epic. The Senate back in Rome? Half impressed, half terrified. His army adored him, his enemies feared him, and Europe, well, Europe was starting to get used to having Roman boots everywhere. Caesar wasn't just expanding borders, he was rewriting the script of what a Roman general could be. Part soldier, part politician, and full-time celebrity. While Caesar was conquering Gaul with swords, he was also conquering Roman hearts with words. His famous line, "Gallia est omnis divisa in partes tres," opened his war memoirs, Commentarii de Bello Gallico, which read less like a dull field report and more like a bestseller with a political agenda. Every chapter subtly praised Caesar's genius, his leadership, and how incredibly lucky Rome was to have him. It wasn't just military conquest, it was brand building. Through vivid storytelling and just enough Latin flair, Caesar turned blood-soaked battlefields into golden PR. Senators back in Rome read the reports with mixed emotions, pride in victory, but also a creeping sense that Caesar was writing himself into history as Rome's one true hero. Turns out, ink can be just as sharp as a sword. The First Triumvirate was always a fragile alliance. held together more by convenience than love. Caesar had Gaul, Pompey had influence in Rome, and Crassus had money. But then Crassus decided to chase glory instead of gold and marched eastward to fight the Parthians. Spoiler, it did not go well. At the Battle of Carrhae, Crassus and his army were crushed. According to some accounts, the Parthians poured molten gold down his throat as a tribute to his greed. With Crassus gone, the balance was broken. Caesar and Pompey now stood face to face, each seeing the other as a threat. What was once a political partnership quickly devolved into a power struggle. And as we'll see soon, Rome had no room for two alpha dogs. The Rubicon was just a narrow river, but crossing it was a giant leap into history. In 49 BCE, Caesar stood at its banks with his loyal legion, looked toward Rome, and muttered the infamous line, "The die is cast." He knew he wasn't just breaking a military boundary, he was declaring war on the Roman Republic itself. The Senate had ordered him to disband his army and return as a private citizen. Instead, Caesar chose drama, destiny, and dictatorship. As he marched south, panic spread in Rome. Senators fled, Pompey packed his bags, and even the geese at the Capitoline Hill probably honked in distress. This wasn't just politics anymore. This was a civil war with a flair for theatrics. Pompey, once Caesar's ally and now his bitter rival, fled to Egypt after his crushing defeat. He probably hoped for a royal welcome and a strategic alliance with the young pharaoh. Instead, he got a reception colder than a Roman winter. The Egyptians, fearing Caesar's wrath more than they valued Pompey's loyalty, decided to win favor the old-fashioned way by eliminating the guest. As soon as Pompey set foot on Egyptian soil, he was stabbed and beheaded by order of the young King Ptolemy III. When Caesar arrived shortly after, expecting a tense political negotiation, he was instead handed Pompey's severed head in a jar. The gesture didn't exactly spark joy. Caesar reportedly wept. Whether it was grief or theatrical outrage, no one knows. But one thing was clear. Egypt just played a very bloody game of who wants to impress a dictator. After the messy affair with Pompey's assassination, Caesar stuck around in Egypt, and not just to sightsee. Enter Cleopatra. Young, sharp, politically savvy, and with charisma potent enough to melt even the most stoic Roman general. Their first meeting wasn't your typical state banquet. Cleopatra was smuggled into Caesar's quarters, rolled inside a carpet. Yes, a carpet. Talk about dramatic entrance. Caesar was instantly captivated. The two struck up not just a romance, but a powerful alliance. Cleopatra needed Roman support to secure her throne. Caesar needed Egypt's grain and influence. What started with linen and strategy turned into a full-blown affair with diplomatic perks. Soon, Caesar was lounging in Alexandria longer than his Senate liked, enjoying Nile cruises, intellectual debates, and maybe one too many love poems. Rome started whispering, "Has Caesar been conquered by the Queen of the Nile?" they asked. Answer, probably yes. With Pompey out of the picture and Cleopatra suitably charmed, Caesar turned his attention to mopping up resistance across the empire. First stop, Asia Minor. He dashed in, won a battle, and dashed out. So fast he declared, "Veni, vidi, vici." I came, I saw, I conquered. Possibly while brushing imaginary dust off his toga. Next he cleaned up trouble in North Africa, then Spain, chasing down Pompey's sons like a dad collecting overdue homework. Each victory added to his myth. Rome was now truly Caesar's playground. He returned not just as a general, but as an undisputed ruler. The Senate, once a place of fierce debate, had turned into a round of polite applause. Caesar had it all: glory, popularity, political control, and even a dramatic love story in his portfolio. But as he paraded through Rome in triumph, waving like a celebrity on a chariot, not everyone was cheering. Behind the smiles were daggers being sharpened. With Rome firmly under his sandal, Caesar decided to skip the formalities and go full dictator. Literally. In 44 BC, the Senate officially declared him dictator for life. Cue the awkward applause. Caesar, never one for subtlety, launched a flurry of reforms. He cleaned up the calendar, thank him for July, packed the Senate with loyalists, and started public works to please the masses. Bread and circuses? More like bread, circuses, and Caesar statues popping up like mushrooms. While many Romans loved the stability and spectacle, the old aristocrats were horrified. Dictator for life sounded a bit too much like king, a big no-no in Roman political culture. But Caesar didn't care. He strutted through the forum in purple robes, gave speeches like a rock star, and accepted honors like a kid in a candy shop. Behind the scenes, however, some senators were already whispering, "This guy's not going to retire, is he?" Spoiler alert, he wasn't. As Caesar strutted through Rome like he owned the place, because he basically did, a chill settled over the Senate chambers. Whispers echoed in marble halls. Noblemen in togas exchanged worried glances over wine cups. The title dictator for life wasn't sitting well with Rome's elite. These men prided themselves on being guardians of the Republic, and now they felt more like Caesar's background dancers. Fear gave way to paranoia. Secret meetings were held in shadowy corners, scrolls unfurled in candlelight. The group was an odd bunch, some idealists dreaming of the old Republic, others just salty they weren't Caesar's favorites. But all agreed on one thing: he had to go. The plan? A classic Roman move. Stab first, ask questions never. It wouldn't be easy. Caesar was still wildly popular, but desperate times call for sharp daggers. And so the conspiracy was born, not out of hatred, but a warped sense of patriotic duty and a sprinkle of jealousy. The Ides of March 44 BCE, a day like any other, except it would end with 23 stabs and the end of an era. Caesar entered the theater of Pompey dressed sharply, expecting a regular Senate meeting. Instead, he got a surprise party, minus the cake and with a lot more daggers. The conspirators swarmed him like angry bees in togas. Caesar, confused, tried to fend them off, but one dagger after another found its mark. Even his old buddy Brutus joined in. It wasn't personal, they claimed, just politics, old sport. The Senate floor, once a place of debate, became a scene from a horror play. In a moment that would echo through history, Caesar fell, leaving behind a bloodied toga, shocked senators, and a republic that had just signed its own death warrant. As Caesar lay dying on the marble floor of the Senate, legend says he locked eyes with Brutus and whispered, "Et tu, Brute?" A phrase so dramatic it could have been ghost-written by Shakespeare himself. Whether he actually said it or not, it captured the betrayal perfectly. One moment he was the most powerful man in Rome. The next he was a cautionary tale in sandals. The senators, panting and unsure what to do next, stood over their victim like schoolboys who had just broken the principal's vase. Rome was stunned. The public didn't cheer, they mourned. Caesar's funeral became a political powder keg, and his death didn't restore the Republic as intended. Instead, it opened the door for even more chaos. The last act of Julius Caesar wasn't just a personal tragedy, it was the final nail in the coffin of the Roman Republic. The Senate hadn't even finished mopping Caesar's blood off the marble floor when Rome was hit with another surprise: his will. Everyone expected him to leave his fortune to Mark Antony, or maybe the Republic. But no, the lucky winner was his teenage grandnephew, Gaius Octavius, better known as Octavian, whom he adopted posthumously as his son. That's right, Caesar reached from beyond the grave to handpick his successor, like a true drama king. The senators groaned, Antony blinked in disbelief, and Octavian, still fresh-faced and untested, stepped into the spotlight. Nobody expected much. After all, what could a 19-year-old possibly do against seasoned generals and political sharks? Spoiler alert, everything. This humble-looking boy with a spine of steel and the patience of a chess master would go on to reshape the future of Rome. But for now, he just had a will, a name, and the most powerful ghost in Roman history backing him. Octavian knew he couldn't take on Rome's chaos alone, so he did what any ambitious Roman would: formed a power trio. Enter the second triumvirate: Octavian, Mark Antony, and the somewhat forgotten Lepidus. They weren't exactly besties, but they all shared one common goal: revenge for Caesar. Together, they divided the Roman world like slices of a pizza. then went full vendetta mode against Caesar's assassins. Their alliance was more business than friendship, sealed not with a toast but with a kill list of enemies, hundreds of names long, including poor Cicero, who made the mistake of speaking too well. For now they were united, storming the political stage with brutal efficiency. But with 3 egos and 1 empire on the table, how long could this last? Spoiler, not very. Still, the second triumvirate got the job done. For now. Rome had a new regime, and the Republic was looking more and more like ancient history. The battlefield of Philippi wasn't just blood and glory. It was drama on an epic scale. On one side, Octavian and Mark Antony, waving Caesar's memory like a rallying flag. On the other, Brutus and Cassius, the infamous assassins trying to save what was left of the Republic. Spoiler alert, it didn't end well for the dagger crew. Cassius, thinking all was lost, panicked and fell on his sword. Too early. Brutus followed shortly after, whispering poetic last words while his troops were still figuring out which direction was retreat. The Republic's dream died that day, not with a roar, but with a dramatic double suicide. Octavian and Antony emerged victorious, chest puffed and soaked in post-battle swagger. Rome, once again, belonged to the bold, and the age of old senators waving scrolls was coming to a close. The stage was now cleared for power, unapologetic, unshared, and wearing a laurel crown. With Brutus and Cassius gone, the second triumvirate had no real enemies left, except each other. Like any good power trio, cracks began to show. Lepidus, the quiet one, made a political misstep and was swiftly exiled to the Roman version of retirement, obscurity and goat farming. That left 2, Antony and Octavian. But instead of working together, Antony sailed to Egypt and fell head over sandals for Cleopatra. The Queen of the Nile wasn't just beautiful, she was brilliant, charming, and happened to rule a kingdom with ships and money. Rome watched in horror and gossip as Antony traded togas for tunics and started acting more pharaoh than general. Meanwhile, Octavian stayed put, playing the good Roman, building alliances, and slowly crafting the narrative. Look, he's betraying us for a woman. The bromance was over, and the countdown to the final showdown had begun. While Antony was busy playing house with Cleopatra, Octavian was hard at work launching Rome's first major PR campaign. Posters, poets, and public speeches all painted Antony as a traitor to Roman values, a man who had abandoned his toga for exotic luxuries and Eastern enchantments. The man who once led legions now bows to a queen, Octavian cried. Probably not in those exact words, but you get the idea. He accused Antony of plotting to move the Roman capital to Alexandria and give Roman lands to Cleopatra's children. Scandalous. The Roman Senate gasped. Citizens whispered. The gossip grapevine worked overtime. And just like that, Octavian positioned himself as the last true defender of Roman virtue, while Antony was reduced to the villain in an epic soap opera. With the Senate's support and the crowd on his side, Octavian turned public opinion into a weapon sharper than any gladius. The final showdown was set, Octavian's fleet versus Antony and Cleopatra's navy at the Battle of Actium in 31 BCE. Octavian, young but cunning, positioned his ships to cut off supplies while his admiral Agrippa handled the tactics. On the other side, Antony commanded from a ship that was more luxury yacht than war machine, while Cleopatra's golden galley glistened in the sun like a floating palace. The sea was chaos. Sails snapped, ships burned, and orders were lost in the roar of waves and battle cries. Then the plot twist. Cleopatra's fleet suddenly turned tail and fled. Antony, caught between love and war, did the most Roman thing possible. He followed her. With their navy shattered and their morale sunk lower than a Roman anchor, Octavian claimed a decisive victory. Rome cheered. Antony's reputation sunk along with his ships. After the crushing defeat at Actium, Antony and Cleopatra retreated to Alexandria, where things went from tragic to operatic very quickly. With Octavian marching toward Egypt, panic set in. Cleopatra, ever the drama queen, literally, barricaded herself in her mausoleum and spread rumors of her own death. Because why not test Antony's love one last time? It worked. Sort of. Antony, devastated, stabbed himself, except he didn't quite die. He was then dragged, bleeding and confused, into Cleopatra's arms. One final messy reunion. Soon after realizing the game was truly over, Cleopatra famously took her own life, either by snakebite, poison, or sheer exhaustion from the century's most complicated romance. Thus ended not only a tragic love story, but the last breath of independent Egypt. Octavian, walking in like a calm accountant after a wild party, claimed the land, the treasury, and a massive PR win for Rome. After years of civil war and political chaos, Octavian returned to Rome not as a general, but as a savior. The Senate, exhausted and a bit terrified, decided to hand him the ultimate prize, power. But Octavian played it cool. Instead of declaring himself king, bad PR, he humbly returned power to the Senate, only for the Senate to immediately give it back, along with a new shiny title, Augustus. It meant the revered one, and oh boy, did it stick. Augustus became Rome's first emperor without ever saying the word emperor. He was still first among equals, just with more land, more armies, and more statues of himself than anyone else. Thus, the Roman Republic officially evolved, or quietly died, into an empire, with better branding and fewer assassinations, for now. Augustus was a master of appearances. He knew Romans hated kings, so he put on a brilliant political performance, pretending to give up power only to reluctantly accept it back when the Senate begged him to stay. Classic move. He portrayed himself not as a dictator, but as the humble servant of Rome, someone who only took charge because, oh no, no one else could do the job. Statues showed him barefoot like a priest, his house modest, but still guarded like a fortress, and his speeches full of "I serve the people" slogans. It was all a beautifully crafted illusion. Underneath the modest robe was an iron grip. The Republic lived on in name, but Augustus ran the empire like a well-oiled machine, with himself at the center, of course. Once Augustus had secured his position, he pulled out the imperial blueprint and got to work. One of his smartest moves? Reorganizing the provinces, he neatly divided them into two categories: those under the Senate, where things were mostly peaceful, and those under his direct control, you know, the ones with all the legions. It was a masterclass in pretending to share power while actually keeping the keys to the empire. Governors for senatorial provinces were chosen by lot, like a game of spin the emperor, while Augustus handpicked loyal buddies for the provinces with swords and soldiers. That way, he looked democratic while having eyes and ears everywhere. Rome was still a republic on paper, but only if you didn't squint too hard. While Augustus maintained the polite illusion of a republic, he made absolutely sure the army knew who the real boss was. He personally commanded most of the Roman legions, stationed in key provinces. Forget the Senate. Augustus held the purse strings and the sword. He made sure soldiers were loyal to him, not the state, by providing regular pay, bonuses, and a comfy retirement plan with land grants. It was less serve your country and more serve the guy who signs your paycheck. Smart move, since in Rome, whoever had the army had the power. And Augustus? He had all the legions marching to his drum, literally. With the chaos of civil war behind him, Augustus ruled with an iron grip wrapped in a velvet glove. His reign brought 2 centuries of relative peace and prosperity across the Roman world, something the Romans called Pax Romana. Roads were built, trade flourished, and poets like Virgil got paid to glorify the new golden age. Augustus didn't just build an empire, he built a brand. Statues of him popped up like imperial franchise signs, and temples bearing his name multiplied faster than taverns on payday. Behind the calm, though, the system depended entirely on one man holding it all together. Spoiler alert, that's not sustainable forever. Pax Romana, or Roman peace, wasn't just a feel-good slogan, it was Augustus's marketing masterpiece. For nearly 2 centuries, the Roman Empire enjoyed relative stability, reduced civil wars, and an economy that didn't completely collapse every Tuesday. Borders held, mostly, roads stayed open, and cities thrived with aqueducts and bathhouses. Sure, there were occasional rebellions and mad emperors, but compared to the chaos of the Republic, Pax Romana was Rome's equivalent of a spa day, except with more togas and fewer cucumbers on the eyes. You've probably heard the phrase, all roads lead to Rome. And in the Roman Empire, it was nearly true. With over 400,000 km of roads built across 3 continents, the Romans were basically the civil engineers of the ancient world. These stone-paved highways connected cities, outposts, and even remote provinces like Britannia and Syria. Soldiers marched on them, merchants traded on them, and messengers sped across them like ancient Amazon Prime. Road signs, rest stations, and mile markers. Oh yes, Rome did it all. The roads weren't just infrastructure. They were arteries of empire, pumping administration, trade, and propaganda through the veins of civilization. If Roman roads were the arteries of the empire, aqueducts were the plumbing. Thanks to these magnificent stone structures, cities across the empire enjoyed fresh running water centuries before the rest of the world figured out indoor plumbing. Aqueducts transported water from distant mountains, across valleys and into public fountains, baths, and even private homes. If you were rich, of course. The engineering was so good, some aqueducts still function today. Romans even had sewer systems like the Cloaca Maxima, which sounds like a Harry Potter spell, but was actually a giant drain. In short, they had better water infrastructure than some modern cities, and way more public baths. If Hollywood had existed in ancient times, the Colosseum would have been the biggest box office hit. Built to entertain up to 50,000 Romans, this giant amphitheater hosted everything from gladiator duels to wild beast hunts and even mock naval battles, because why not flood an entire arena for fun? The crowd came for blood, drama, and the occasional guy getting mauled by a tiger. Emperors used the games as a political tool. Free entertainment meant happy citizens who asked fewer questions about taxes. Behind the scenes, gladiators trained like ancient action stars, with fame and fortune, or a quick death, awaiting them. The Colosseum was loud, chaotic, and completely Roman. Roman city life was a chaotic symphony of splashes, shouts, and sizzling street food. Public baths weren't just for getting clean. They were the social media of the day. Citizens lounged, gossiped, and conducted business in steamy steam rooms, all while half naked. Taverns lined the streets with drunken philosophers and dice games. Markets overflowed with olives, amphorae, and pickpockets, while musicians and fire eaters performed for coins. And if you were tired of people, too bad, apartments, insulae, stacked you with noisy neighbors above and noisy bakers below. But despite the noise, smoke, and occasional riot, urban life in Rome was vibrant, lively, and strangely modern, just with more togas and fewer Wi-Fi passwords. Roman society was a fascinating cocktail of citizens, slaves, senators, merchants, and everything in between. A Roman senator in a pristine toga might share the same street as a slave hauling amphorae or a cheeky street vendor shouting about fresh olives. Citizens had rights and opinions. Freedmen had ambition, and slaves had a lot of chores. Merchants ran noisy stalls while noblewomen glided past in gold-trimmed stolas, pretending not to notice the fish smell. In the heart of Rome, class distinctions were real, but daily life was a glorious mess of mingling. The Senate debated, the baker baked, and the gladiator trained, all part of the strange shared drama called the Roman Empire. After Augustus, the Roman throne passed to a string of emperors, some capable, some rather eccentric. Tiberius, Augustus's stepson, was a decent general but had the social skills of a rock. Then came Caligula, the poster child for imperial weirdness. He allegedly made his horse a senator, because why not? And once declared war on Neptune, the sea god, by stabbing the ocean with spears. While historians still debate how much was real and how much was Roman gossip, one thing's clear: stability didn't always come with sanity. Claudius, surprisingly competent despite being mocked for his limp and stutter, ended up expanding the empire into Britain. The imperial palace, it seemed, was never short of drama or awkward dinner parties. Ah, Nero. If Roman emperors had a most dramatic award, he'd win it hands down. A performer at heart, Nero fancied himself a poet, actor, and lyre player, much to the Senate's horror. He even forced nobles to sit through his lengthy performances. You couldn't leave early unless you fancied a mysterious disappearance. But his name is forever linked with the Great Fire of Rome in 64 AD. Rumors swirled that Nero fiddled while the city burned, though fiddles didn't even exist yet. What we do know is he used the fire as an excuse to build a lavish new palace, the Domus Aurea, complete with rotating dining rooms. To shift blame, Nero began persecuting Christians, which only added to his notoriety. Despite the chaos, he ruled for over a decade before being declared a public enemy. His final act? A dramatic suicide lamenting, "What an artist dies in me." Say what you will. Nero certainly knew how to make an exit. After Nero's melodramatic exit, Rome was, well, a bit crispy. The city was in ruins, morale was low, and the Domus Aurea, Nero's golden bling palace, stood like a bad punchline in the heart of the capital. Enter the Flavian dynasty, Vespasian and his sons, Titus and Domitian. These guys rolled up their sleeves. Okay, metaphorically, togas don't have sleeves, and got to work rebuilding Rome with good old-fashioned practicality. The most iconic of their projects, the Colosseum, built right over the site of Nero's former lake, it was a gift to the people. An epic stadium where gladiators could stab each other to roaring applause. Vespasian was like, no more gold palaces, give the people bread, and circuses. Under his rule, public buildings popped up, taxes stabilized, and Rome got a much-needed facelift. Titus, despite a short reign, became beloved for helping during disasters, like the eruption of Mount Vesuvius. Domitian? A bit intense. But one thing was clear. The Flavians turned Rome from a smoldering stage set back into the capital of the ancient world. After the Flavians came a golden lineup so legendary that even modern HR teams would cry tears of joy. They're called the Five Good Emperors. Yes, that was their actual nickname, not a sarcastic meme. First came Nerva, the wise grandpa who stabilized succession rules. Then Trajan, the empire's MVP, who expanded Roman territory like he was playing Risk. Hadrian followed with a cooler head, pulling back borders and building massive walls. Yes, that Hadrian's Wall. Antoninus Pius ruled with such peace and decency, historians barely have anything scandalous to report, which is rare in Roman politics. And finally, Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher-emperor who somehow wrote deep reflections on life while leading wars. Together, these five formed the most competent, drama-free imperial squad Rome ever saw. Under them, the empire enjoyed peace, smart governance, and philosophical vibes. Think of it as Rome's version of a chill lo-fi playlist. Under Emperor Trajan, the Roman Empire reached its greatest territorial extent, a moment in history when Roman generals probably needed GPS just to report home. Trajan was not only a skilled military leader, but also a master of logistics, strategy, and dramatic expansion. His campaigns pushed the borders of the empire far beyond the Danube, annexing Dacia, modern-day Romania, and then moved eastward through Mesopotamia all the way to the Persian Gulf. The Roman Empire now stretched from the misty isles of Britain to the sands of Arabia, and Trajan was hailed as a conqueror king. Of course, with great conquest came great bureaucracy. Imagine the paperwork. But Trajan's success wasn't just in maps and battles. He also invested heavily in infrastructure, roads, aqueducts, and the magnificent Trajan's Forum in Rome. He expanded both the empire's size and its sense of Roman identity. It was, quite literally, the empire on steroids. After Trajan's wild expansion spree, Emperor Hadrian came along and essentially said, "Okay, that's enough empire for now." While Trajan added new territories like it was a board game, Hadrian took a more pragmatic approach: consolidate, stabilize, and build a really big wall. Yes, Hadrian's Wall, that long, stony, do not enter sign stretching across northern Britain. It wasn't just a defensive line, it was a declaration, this far, no farther. Hadrian believed the empire was easier to maintain than to endlessly grow, and his policies reflected that. He focused on administration, diplomacy, and improving border defenses rather than conquest. But don't be fooled. The wall wasn't just rocks and bricks. It had forts, watchtowers, and a whole system of logistics behind it. While Britain's barbarians probably weren't thrilled, Roman soldiers finally got a break from constant marching. Hadrian's decision marked a turning point. The empire would hold, not chase, and sometimes knowing when to stop is the most powerful move of all. The death of Emperor Marcus Aurelius in 180 CE marked the end of the Five Good Emperors era, a golden age of relative peace, wise leadership, and philosophical emperors who actually read books. As he passed away, possibly from the plague during a military campaign, the empire lost its last truly respected leader. Unfortunately, he left the throne to his son, Commodus, a man whose idea of ruling was dressing like Hercules and fighting gladiators. Marcus was a stoic, a thinker, a man of virtue. Commodus, well, let's just say he wasn't. With Marcus's death, the delicate balance of power tilted. The Senate grew nervous, the army grew restless, and the empire, it braced for impact. Historians would look back at this as the moment the empire stopped climbing and started wobbling, like a glorious Roman chariot that had lost a wheel. Pax Romana was over. What followed wasn't a crash, but a slow-motion political car wreck. Enter Commodus, the emperor who treated the Roman Empire like his personal action movie. Instead of attending Senate meetings, he preferred swinging swords in the Colosseum, role-playing as Hercules, and charging the state treasury for every performance. While previous emperors built roads and aqueducts, Commodus built statues of himself in increasingly ridiculous heroic poses. His obsession with gladiator combat was so intense that he actually fought in the arena, against wounded opponents, of course, and demanded to be paid for his shows. The Senate watched in horror while Rome descended into chaos. Corruption skyrocketed, assassinations increased, and the empire's stability trembled under the weight of his vanity. Eventually, even his inner circle had enough and plotted his assassination during bath time. His reign was less about governance and more like reality TV, complete with costumes, drama, and an inevitable cancellation. Welcome to the crisis of the 3rd century, also known as Who Wants to Be Emperor? Spoiler, everyone, for about 5 minutes. Following Commodus's chaos, the Roman Empire turned into a revolving door of emperors. In just 50 years, over 20 emperors claimed the throne, most of whom met the same unfortunate fate: betrayal, assassination, or dramatic exits via dagger. Ambitious generals from all corners of the empire, Gaul, the Balkans, Syria, took turns marching into Rome with their armies and their dreams, only to end up on the wrong side of a blade. Stability? Long gone. The Senate? Powerless. Citizens? Exhausted. Rome, once the symbol of strength, looked like a badly run reality show with no producer. Even the soldiers got confused. Wait, who's the emperor this week again? It was a time of pure madness, where loyalty was fleeting, borders were crumbling, and the crown was more dangerous than a lion in the Colosseum. As if political chaos wasn't enough, the Roman economy decided to spiral into its own dramatic crisis. Inflation skyrocketed faster than a chariot race, with coins being minted from increasingly worthless metals. Think silver-coated tin pretending to be royalty. Merchants started weighing coins instead of counting them, and peasants began hiding their grain like it was gold. Bread prices soared, salaries shrank, and the common citizen found themselves wondering if a denarius could even buy a fig anymore. Food shortages swept the empire, with riots erupting in marketplaces where the only thing in abundance was shouting. Soldiers, once loyal for gold, now demanded land, or just threatened to crown a new emperor. The empire wasn't just bleeding from the borders, it was starving from within. Economic stability had left the chat, and Rome was feeling the hangover of centuries of overspending, underplanning, and Nero-level extravagance. As if internal chaos wasn't enough, Rome's borders became the ancient world's version of an open-door policy, just not by choice. From the cold forests of the north came the Goths and the Franks, their warriors wearing furs and swinging axes with wild enthusiasm. From the east, the Sassanids stormed in with armored cavalry and an attitude that screamed, "Revenge for Persia." The Alemanni weren't far behind, showing up uninvited like that cousin who brings a goat to your wedding. Rome, once the conqueror, now found itself scrambling to defend provinces it barely remembered owning. Legions were spread thin, fortresses crumbled, and governors sent panicked scrolls to the Senate, saying things like, "Send help. Also, maybe more wine." The Roman frontier had turned into a chaotic no man's land, with raids, skirmishes, and dramatic shouting in multiple languages. Pax Romana? That was now a fond memory, and even Mars, the god of war, probably needed a vacation. If you thought Roman politics was messy before, wait till the army decided it could do HR. During the 3rd century crisis, the legions turned into talent scouts with swords, choosing, replacing, and occasionally retiring emperors based on vibes. A soldier might wake up, finish breakfast, then overthrow the emperor before lunch. The phrase command chain became more of a roulette wheel. One day you're guarding a tent, the next you're wearing a laurel crown wondering what taxes are. Loyalty meant little when promotions came with a stab. The Praetorian Guard? They practically ran an auction house. Highest bidder gets the throne. Bring your own dagger. Stability? Forget it. Emperors ruled for months, sometimes weeks, before being promoted to the afterlife. The army, once the backbone of Rome, was now its wild card. The battlefield and the throne room had merged, and the toga-wearing elite couldn't keep up. Rome wasn't being conquered from the outside. It was being conquered from within, one military coup at a time. In the midst of a crumbling empire where emperors changed faster than tavern menus, one man stood up and said, "Enough!" His name was Aurelian. No nonsense, no poetry, just action. Nicknamed the Restorer of the World, a title he may or may not have invented himself, Aurelian was done playing emperor musical chairs. He defeated rebellious provinces, kicked out barbarian invaders, and, because he believed in strong borders, built a massive wall around Rome. The Aurelian walls were like a giant concrete "do not disturb" sign for all would-be attackers. With stone, sweat, and sheer military will, Aurelian brought temporary sanity to the chaos. He ruled with an iron fist and a slightly impatient scowl. Was it perfect peace? Not even close. But compared to the soap opera before him, it was practically a golden age. If Rome had Yelp reviews back then, Aurelian would have at least earned a solid 4 stars. Tough ruler, good walls would follow again. Diocletian looked at the chaos and said, "Okay, clearly one emperor isn't enough." So he came up with the boldest HR restructuring in Roman history, the Tetrarchy. 2 senior emperors, Augusti, and 2 juniors, Caesars, to manage the sprawling empire like a corporate board of directors. He also split the empire into east and west, because what could go wrong with dividing an already crumbling pie? It was power sharing with swords. Each emperor got their own chunk of land, army, palace, and of course, personal ego. Diocletian himself ruled from Nicomedia in the east and left Rome to stew in its own nostalgia. And to top it off, he insisted on divine status, dressing like a living god while the people squinted, unsure whether to bow or laugh. Surprisingly, this system brought a bit of stability. For a few years, the emperors stopped stabbing each other at dinner parties. A small win. But like most group projects, it eventually fell apart when egos clashed and people forgot whose turn it was to rule. Classic Rome. After restructuring the empire, Diocletian turned his attention to a growing problem: Christianity. To him, Christians were like office workers refusing to wear the company uniform. Disruptive, non-compliant, and weirdly enthusiastic about being martyred. So in 303 AD, he launched what would become the largest and most systematic persecution of Christians in Roman history. Churches were torn down, scriptures burned, and believers forced to renounce their faith or face a creatively unpleasant end. While Diocletian thought he was restoring Roman order, he accidentally gave Christianity a PR campaign. Martyrdom became a badge of honor, and underground churches only multiplied. The more Rome tried to stamp it out, the more determined the Christians became. Somewhere, a Roman governor probably groaned, "Every time we execute one, 3 more show up tomorrow." Diocletian retired thinking he had crushed the rebellion. Spoiler, he didn't. Instead, he lit the fuse for a religious revolution that would soon sweep across the entire empire, led by the very man who'd succeed him. Oh, the irony. Following Diocletian's retirement, the empire didn't gracefully settle into its new tetrarchy system. Instead, it erupted like a pot of overcooked Roman stew, bubbling over with civil wars and backstabbing generals. In this chaos, a young and ambitious Constantine emerged. Son of Constantius, a former tetrarch, Constantine knew how to survive Roman politics with speed, strategy, and a slightly suspicious number of miraculous signs. After a few assassination-dodging years and multiple contenders mysteriously retiring, Constantine finally claimed sole rule of the Roman Empire in 324 AD. With one foot in the Senate and the other in his soldiers' loyalty, he did what no one had done in decades: unified the fractured empire. He styled himself not just as emperor, but as a chosen one. Divine favor, shiny armor, and a flair for political theater turned Constantine into Rome's last unifier. Of course, not everyone cheered. Some senators grumbled into their wine, while rival generals found themselves suddenly unemployed or headless. But Constantine had done it. Peace, for now, power, absolute, and a legacy that would reshape both Rome and religion forever. The Battle of the Milvian Bridge wasn't just a typical Roman scuffle. It was where faith met fate, and Constantine found his marketing edge. The story goes that on the eve of battle, Constantine saw a vision, a bright cross in the sky with the words, "In this sign, conquer." Never one to ignore good PR, he ordered his troops to paint the mysterious symbol on their shields. The next day, they charged into battle against Maxentius, who tragically forgot to check the bridge's weight capacity. Long story short, Maxentius drowned, Constantine won, and Christianity suddenly had a very powerful friend in Rome. Whether divine miracle or lucky accident, Constantine's victory marked a turning point. It wasn't just about swords anymore. Now crosses carried clout. Rome began its slow but unstoppable transformation from polytheistic empire to Christian powerhouse, and all thanks to one bridge, one battle, and one well-timed heavenly advertisement. Rome had become a bit too chaotic for Constantine's taste, so he did what any sensible emperor would do: pack up and build a brand new capital. Enter Constantinople, the city that screamed, "I'm rich, holy, and strategically placed." Nestled on the Bosporus Strait, this fresh metropolis was basically Rome 2.0, but with better planning and less gladiator blood on the streets. Constantine spared no expense. Marble palaces, grand forums, shimmering churches, the works. And the best part? He got to name it after himself. Talk about legacy branding. While Rome still stood, Constantinople quickly grew into the political and cultural heart of the Eastern Empire. With one move, Constantine shifted the empire's center of gravity eastward, laying the foundation for what would become the Byzantine Empire. It was elegant, ambitious, and, most importantly, far from the Roman Senate's nagging. Smart move, Your Majesty. When Emperor Theodosius took his final breath in 395 AD, the Roman Empire didn't just mourn, it cracked in half. His death marked the official division of the empire into East and West, each with its own emperor, army, and infinite bureaucratic headaches. The East, with its shiny new capital Constantinople, seemed to have a solid future ahead. The West, however, not so much. Think fewer resources, more invading barbarians, and a constant game of musical thrones. Theodosius had hoped his sons could handle the job. Arcadius in the east and Honorius in the west. But let's just say neither inherited Dad's imperial flair. The stage was set for a slow, chaotic unraveling, especially in the west, where the empire would soon resemble a badly managed theme park during a zombie apocalypse. The dream of a united Roman Empire that officially died with Theodosius. The Visigoths weren't looking for trouble, at least not at first. They were refugees, fleeing the ruthless Huns and hoping for some Roman hospitality. But instead of welcome mats, they were met with high taxes, starvation rations, and corrupt Roman officials who thought empathy was a Greek word they didn't have time for. Desperate and humiliated, the Visigoths, led by their increasingly irritated leaders, decided enough was enough. "If you won't feed us, we'll help ourselves," became their unofficial slogan. What began as a plea for protection turned into a full-blown rebellion. And the Romans, busy bickering in the Senate and pretending it wasn't their problem. Spoiler, it very much was. The Visigoths would go from unwanted guests to furious invaders, setting off a chain reaction that would shake the Western Roman Empire to its crumbling core. The year is 378, and Rome is about to have a very bad day. Emperor Valens, convinced he could easily crush the Goths near Adrianople, didn't bother waiting for reinforcements. "We've got this," he probably said, famous last words. The Romans, baking under the summer sun in full armor, faced off against a much more mobile Gothic force. And surprise, the Goths had cavalry, lots of it. The Roman lines were crushed in a flurry of hooves, arrows, and general screaming. Valens himself disappeared in the chaos. Some say he burned alive in a farmhouse. Ouch. The Battle of Adrianople didn't just kill an emperor, it shattered Rome's illusion of invincibility. It was a wake-up call they hit snooze on. Meanwhile, the Goths celebrated their first big W against the empire, and it wouldn't be their last. After the disaster at Adrianople, the Visigoths realized they were no longer just refugees. They were now a military force to be reckoned with. And leading them? Alaric, a charismatic and rather ambitious warrior who had a new goal: Italy, marching through the Alps like Hannibal's spiritual cousin, but with fewer elephants. Alaric invaded the Italian peninsula. Rome, once the unshakable center of the world, found itself nervously checking the gates. The Senate panicked. People hoarded grain, and emperors shuffled around like musical chairs. Alaric wasn't in a rush. He was strategic. He laid siege, demanded gold, titles, and maybe a good wine. The Roman response? Stalling, bad deals, and arrogance. Alaric's patience wore thin. The stage was set. Rome hadn't been threatened like this in centuries, and Alaric was about to remind them that Gothic guests don't knock politely. In the year 410, something happened that Romans once thought impossible. Rome was sacked. Alaric and his Visigoth warriors finally entered the Eternal City, not as tourists, but as very angry guests. For 3 days they plundered gold, silver, and anything shiny enough to catch the eye of a barbarian with expensive taste. Citizens screamed, temples were looted, and senators realized marble statues didn't make great hiding places. Though Alaric's men were relatively civilized, no complete burning, no mass slaughter, the psychological impact was nuclear. For the first time in almost 800 years, Rome had been breached. The unbreakable heart of an empire now lay vulnerable and humiliated. Across the empire, whispers turned into gasps. If Rome could fall, what was safe anymore? While Rome was still nursing its bruised ego from the Visigoth sack, the Vandals decided to one-up the chaos, but this time with a splash of maritime flair. Sailing across the Mediterranean like it was their private lake, the Vandals landed in North Africa and swiftly seized the Roman breadbasket. And by breadbasket, we mean the entire grain supply that kept Rome from collectively fainting from hunger. With the ports under Vandal control, the once bustling food shipments turned into tumbleweeds and echoes. Roman citizens, already stressed from invasion and taxes, now had to fight over moldy loaves. Politicians argued while their stomachs growled louder than their speeches. The empire's belly was empty, and so was its hope. In the grand buffet of decline, the Vandals took the bread and the butter too. If the Roman Empire had a worst nightmare list, Attila the Hun would be right at the top, and probably circled in red ink. Known as the Scourge of God, Attila swept through Europe like a hurricane with bad manners. He didn't just want land, he wanted fear, tribute, and maybe a little drama. With wild eyes, unkempt hair, and a voice that could curdle wine, Attila led a fearsome horde that left cities trembling and emperors reconsidering life choices. His negotiation tactics were simple: pay up or get flattened. Rome, already on its last legs, scrambled to appease him with gold and flattery, but even then, it was like feeding a lion hoping it'll turn vegetarian. As Attila rode on horseback across the continent, rumors spread that he could smell fear, and Rome was practically a perfumery. In 451 CE, the fate of Western Europe came down to one chaotic mud wrestling match of epic proportions: the Battle of Chalons. Attila the Hun, still scary, still smelly, was marching west like he owned the place. But this time, Rome wasn't facing him alone. The Romans, led by General Aetius, who probably hadn't slept in weeks, teamed up with their old enemies, the Visigoths. Yep, the same Goths who had sacked Rome now fought to save it. Confusing? Definitely. Epic? Absolutely. On the plains of Gaul, swords clashed, horses screamed, and chaos reigned. Attila's army pushed hard, but the combined Roman Gothic forces hit back even harder. King Theodoric of the Visigoths was killed mid-charge, dramatically. But hey, great for morale. In the end, Attila retreated. Technically not a Roman victory parade, but enough to make the empire breathe a sigh of relief, for now. In 455 CE, Rome had déjà vu, but not the good kind. Just 45 years after being sacked by the Visigoths, the Eternal City once again found itself under siege. This time, the Vandals came knocking, politely. Their king, Genseric, promised not to burn the city if they were let in peacefully. Rome, exhausted and defenseless, said, "Fine, but be nice." Spoiler, they were not. The Vandals looted like kids in a candy store. Temples, palaces, statues, even plumbing. For 2 full weeks, Rome was stripped of its wealth and dignity, leaving behind shocked citizens and very empty shelves. The chaos was so iconic that centuries later, people used the word vandalism to describe this exact kind of destructive behavior. So next time someone smashes a window or graffitis a wall, thank the Vandals for branding an entire word through sheer historical mischief. By the mid-5th century, the Western Roman Empire was like a broken cart with 3 wheels missing and a pigeon living in it. The economy collapsed, trade routes either looted or overrun, cities depopulated and crumbling. The once mighty Roman army now resembled a ragtag mix of mercenaries and unpaid recruits who couldn't tell a spear from a broomstick. Corruption flourished as officials embezzled the last coins from empty treasuries. Politicians changed faster than tavern prices, each promising to restore the empire while secretly packing their bags. Meanwhile, the people endured famine, disease, and random invasions like it was just another Tuesday. Infrastructure, roads, aqueducts, even the postal service disintegrated. The glory days were gone. Rome wasn't falling anymore. It had already face-planted and was now trying to crawl with a pulled hamstring. In the crumbling remains of the Western Roman Empire, someone decided, let's make a child emperor. And so, Romulus Augustulus, barely a teenager, with cheeks still round and eyes full of homework dread, was crowned the last emperor. It was like putting a paper crown on a teddy bear and calling it national defense. Real power lay in the hands of his father, Orestes, who ruled behind the curtain like a puppet master who forgot how to puppet. Romulus sat on the imperial throne, feet dangling, holding a scepter bigger than he was, while the empire around him crumbled like soggy bread. No one really respected him, not even his guards, who often mistook him for a royal intern. His reign didn't inspire confidence. It inspired resignation letters. The once mighty empire, now ruled by a kid who'd probably rather be playing with marbles, was in its final act. A quiet, awkward farewell to the centuries of Roman dominance, led by a boy whose only crime was being born at the worst possible time. In the year 476, the curtain finally fell on the Western Roman Empire, not with a dramatic war, but with a paperwork shuffle. Enter Odoacer, a no-nonsense Germanic general tired of pretending the kid emperor Romulus Augustulus was actually in charge. Marching into the palace, Odoacer likely said something like, "Thanks, kid. I'll take it from here." Romulus, relieved to go back to playing marbles or whatever emperors in name only did, handed over the crown without a fight. No bloodshed, no speeches, just an empire collapsing with the quiet sigh of a tired bureaucrat. Odoacer didn't even bother naming himself emperor. Instead, he just sent the imperial regalia to Constantinople, like returning a library book 300 years overdue. The Western Roman Empire, after centuries of glory, invasions, and internal drama, ended not with fire, but with a shrug, and thus Rome was no more in the West. No more emperors. Just a tired boy and a practical barbarian closing the door behind them. Fade to ruins. Roll credits. Though the Roman Empire may have collapsed, its laws continue to live rent-free in modern courtrooms. Roman law wasn't just a pile of scrolls and grumpy senators shouting in Latin. It laid the groundwork for legal systems across Europe and even parts of the world that never saw a Roman sandal. Concepts like innocent until proven guilty, contracts, wills, and even corporations have Roman roots. Imagine a Roman lawyer in a toga stepping into a modern courtroom. Sure, he'd be confused by the Wi-Fi, but he'd definitely recognize the legal procedures. The Justinian Code, compiled in the Eastern Roman Empire, became a legal rock star in the Middle Ages and still influences civil law today. So next time you sign a lease or get a speeding ticket, just remember, you're living in a Roman sequel. Julius Caesar may be gone, but his paperwork lives on. Latin may be a dead language, but it sure left behind a lively family reunion. Meet the Romance languages: Italian, French, Spanish, Portuguese, and Romanian. 5 modern tongues with one ancient mother. Latin didn't just disappear, it evolved. While Julius Caesar was busy conquering Gaul, he was also accidentally planting linguistic seeds that would bloom into baguettes, gelato, and samba songs centuries later. Church scribes, medieval monks, and enthusiastic Renaissance scholars kept Latin alive long after the Roman Empire fell. Even today, if you speak a Romance language, you're whispering echoes of the Forum. And let's not forget how Latin keeps sneaking into science, law, and medicine. Next time you visit the doctor and hear something ending in "itis," you can thank or blame the Romans. So no, Latin's not dead, it's just gone global. Rome wasn't built in a day, and its architectural legacy certainly didn't vanish overnight. From mighty aqueducts that defied gravity to perfectly proportioned domes that still leave modern engineers scratching their heads, Roman architecture was the blueprint for, well, everything. Ever walked into a courthouse with marble columns? Thank a Roman. Admired a European cathedral's grand arches? Again, Romans. Their city planning, grids, forums, bathhouses, laid the foundation for urban development across centuries. And let's not forget concrete, that unassuming gray magic that let them build structures which miraculously still stand today. Roman builders weren't just architects, they were problem-solving geniuses with a flair for drama. Want your empire to look intimidating and fabulous? Rome had a vault, a dome, and a water pipe for that. Today, their influence is everywhere. In bridges, government buildings, museums, and even suburban malls pretending to be classical. Long before Christianity became a global religion, it was just a small, somewhat suspicious sect spreading through the Roman Empire. But then came a twist worthy of a Netflix drama. Emperor Constantine converted. Boom. Overnight, Christianity went from underdog to official imperial favorite. Roman infrastructure helped it spread like wildfire. Roads for missionaries, forums for preaching, and amphitheaters for less cheerful purposes. As Rome adopted Christianity, it reshaped both faith and empire. Pagan temples were remodeled into churches, saints replaced household gods, and halos were the new fashion statement in mosaics. Eventually, Christianity didn't just survive Rome's fall, it inherited its wardrobe, throne, and mailing list. The Pope even took residence in Rome, like saying, "I'll take the empire." Just the spiritual parts. So today, whether you're walking into a Gothic cathedral or watching a holiday movie about redemption, You're feeling the ripple effects of that Roman-Christian fusion. Holy empire indeed. Imagine a political meeting where people shout, debate, and wave scrolls around dramatically. No, it's not a modern parliament. It's the Roman Senate. The Roman Republic's ideas of checks, balances, and elected representatives were so catchy, they went viral. 2 millennia later. When the United States was being born, its founding fathers basically said, let's do what the Romans did, but without the togas, or maybe keep the togas for special occasions. Concepts like the Senate, veto power, term limits, and civic duty all stem from Rome's political playbook. Sure, Rome didn't invent democracy. The Greeks got there first, but the Romans added a solid PR campaign and some impressive marble columns. The idea that citizens, well, male, land-owning citizens, should have a say in governance was revolutionary, and surprisingly still up for debate today. So next time you watch a government official speaking in front of stone pillars, remember, it's all a bit of Roman cosplay. The Roman army wasn't just a bunch of guys in shiny helmets yelling SPQR. It was the blueprint for military organization for centuries to come. Think of them as the ancient version of a highly efficient, extremely serious corporate team-building retreat. With swords, soldiers were trained to march in perfect lines, build bridges on command, and cook dinner in formation. Discipline was everything. Lose your sword? Congratulations, now you're on ditch-digging duty for a month. The Roman legion wasn't just strong, it was smart. Formations like the testudo, turtle, where shields locked together to make a human tank, inspired awe and fear. They had ranks, manuals, uniforms, and even military pensions. Modern armies? Let's just say they owe a lot to Rome, minus the sandals. So next time you watch a modern drill sergeant bark orders, remember, there's a Roman centurion spiritually nodding in approval somewhere in the great amphitheater in the sky. Before there was the Gregorian calendar, which rules our modern lives with Mondays, deadlines and birthdays, there was the Julian calendar, Julius Caesar's bold attempt to stop time from being a complete mess. You see, Romans were having a hard time knowing when to harvest crops or schedule gladiator fights. So Caesar, never one to shy away from fixing problems with grand gestures, see also crossing the Rubicon, called in some astronomers and boom, 365 days a year, plus a leap day every 4 years. Revolutionary stuff. Sure, it wasn't perfect. There was still some drift. But hey, at least it didn't involve sacrificing goats to guess the date. The Julian calendar laid the foundation for the Gregorian one we still use today. So next time your phone reminds you it's Monday again, you can thank or curse Julius Caesar for keeping time ticking along so efficiently. Even though the Roman Empire crumbled, its symbols are still flexing their muscles today. Take the mighty eagle, once perched proudly atop Roman standards, now casually soaring over government buildings, currency, and even sports logos. Or the Senate, once a political lion's den of togas and debates, its name still graces modern parliaments and senatorial chambers. And the helmet? That iconic plumed Roman helmet remains the go-to image for epic warrior vibes in everything from military insignias to Halloween costumes. It's like Rome never left. It just switched to HD. These symbols didn't just survive, they thrived, evolving from imperial propaganda into timeless emblems of power, order, and occasionally, cosplay. Whether carved in marble or printed on memes, Roman icons are the ultimate historical influencers. You'd think the Roman Empire ended with a dramatic collapse and a mic drop, but surprise, the eastern half, known as the Byzantine Empire, kept the Roman torch burning for another 1,000 years. They called themselves Romans, dressed like Romans, with a bit more glitter, and ran their empire from Constantinople, a city so grand, even Rome would have been jealous. The Byzantines had it all: politics, religion, betrayal, even secret sauce recipes for Greek fire. Think ancient napalm. Sure, things got weird, emperors getting blinded, religious icons being smashed, but they managed to preserve Roman laws, culture, and bureaucracy long after the Western Empire crumbled. In short, when the West hit game over, the East pressed continue. Though the Roman Empire fell over 1,500 years ago, it refuses to be forgotten, especially in pop culture. Gladiators still battle in slow motion on cinema screens. Julius Caesar shows up in comic books, video games, and even pizza commercials. Yes, really. Whether it's Russell Crowe in a tunic, Monty Python poking fun at the Senate, or memes where emperors shout in Latin, it's clear Rome never truly left us. Hollywood loves its togas, and game developers can't resist a Roman conquest campaign. The Colosseum gets more screen time than some modern actors. And let's not even start on the fan theories about Roman aliens building aqueducts. Rome is like that one ex you never really got over, constantly showing up in your feed, your Netflix queue, and maybe your Halloween costume. Why does the Roman Empire refuse to die? At least in our minds. Maybe it's the drama. Emperors with scandals juicier than reality TV. Or the grandeur. Epic roads, mighty legions, and laws that still echo in today's courts. Or perhaps it's because Rome has the perfect marketing team. History buffs, gamers, filmmakers, and meme lords working overtime. From the fall of Caesar to the rise of Byzantium, the Roman story has everything. Betrayal, glory, collapse, rebirth. It's basically a Netflix series waiting to happen. So yes, the empire is long gone, but the myth, that's immortal. Rome still whispers through our calendars, our architecture, our politics, and even our jokes. Admit it, you've at least once shouted, "Et tu, brute?" at someone who finished your snacks. And so, dear viewer, we reach the end of our epic journey. From a she-wolf nursing twin babies to an empire that conquered half the known world, and still somehow lives in our memes. Rome fell, but its influence didn't. Its laws shape our justice systems, its roads became our highways, and its Latin became the medical terms your doctor pretends to understand. We've laughed, hopefully, learned, maybe, and seen how one empire's rise and fall still echoes in modern life. If this tale of senators, Caesars, swords, sandals, and surprisingly smart aqueducts tickled your curiosity, why stop now? Hit like, leave a comment, bonus points for Et tu algorithm, and subscribe for more history that's equal parts fascinating and ridiculous. Because the past is not just ruins and dust, it's drama, legacy, and the occasional toga party. See you in the next adventure.